Okay, hey everybody. This is going to be a short sort of lecture. It's normally a question I usually get asked in class, and so at this point I will just sort of answer the question that I normally get asked. It's about Truman and dropping the atomic bomb. Okay, I remember the year that they put the Enola Gay into the Smithsonian. There was protests and about the Enola Gay going into the Smithsonian Institution, the Air and Space Museum, because the Enola Gay had been the plane that dropped the atomic bomb. And the argument was, it was a terrible thing, and it should have never been done, and things like this. And then some people in the historical community started asking the question, well, why did he drop the bomb? And some of the answers were that he didn't need to. Some people said that the whole purpose behind dropping the atomic bomb was to be an object lesson to the Russians, to scare the Russians, to let them know we had this weapon, and that it was supposed to be sort of a part of Truman's Cold War agenda, um, and that's just markedly unacceptable. Um, Number one, that would turn Truman into some kind of real monster to kill that many people just as an object, as a warning to the Russians. So what I want to do is explain probably what the rationale, the mindset behind the decision to drop the first two and only two atomic bombs used in combat were. Now, couple things. When the Manhattan Project was being developed during Roosevelt's administration, this was a plan that we were working towards. We were looking for this device. So it wasn't something that Truman had done on his own. This was something that was part of our strategy at some point, and we were actually sort of racing the Germans to find this answer, to split the atom and be able to use it as a weapon. The as far as the Pacific Theater was concerned, as we start moving towards mainland Japan, we take a tactic where we start doing island hopping. Right? You'll have luckily I got my kid's chalkboard here. You'll have a number of small islands, right, before you get to Japan itself, right? And so what we started doing was we would skip certain islands. We would take this island and take this island and leave this island and this island. We'd just leave it alone. Of course, we would cut off the Japanese supply lines, so the Japanese soldiers on there, we weren't having to conquer those two islands. Okay, and so that was the strategy. But as we approached the Japanese mainland, things got more extreme. Things got a whole lot more serious. Two major battles just before that, the Battle of Iwo Jima and the Battle of Okinawa. These two battles were tenacious. They were brutal. I believe it was in Okinawa. Okinawa was the largest amphibious landing in the Pacific Theater. In this battle for Okinawa, over 100,000 Japanese are going to die, and more than 50,000 allies are going to die. And so we realize, because right after that we're going to hit the main island in order to defeat Japan, and it's Truman has been advised, and FDR prior to this, that once we try to take the Japanese mainland, the people themselves are going to turn out. The people are going to attempt to, because it's their duty, they have to repel the invaders based on their loyalty, their devotion to the emperor. The idea is that even if the people have to come out with bamboo and with spearheads, they are going to try to repel these invaders from their shores. the estimates of losses in the Japanese invasion were in the millions as far as the Japanese people were concerned, because these people would come out with knives and swords and spears and try to repel this invading army, and the soldiers would have to defend themselves. And so it's this idea that they would be mowing down millions of civilians in order to secure the foothold and to get onto the mainland. Okay, now once the Manhattan Project has proved successful, once they have the first successful detonation, then a second plan emerges. What we know after the bombs are dropped, when the bombs are dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think Hiroshima's larger city, so about 125,000 people die immediately in the immediate aftermath of the bombing, and then more than about 80,000 to 90,000 people are killed in Nagasaki when this bomb is dropped. Truman comes on the air and he warns the Japanese people. He says, if you do not unconditionally surrender, we will use a weapon of great devastation and destruction, and we will and until you're ready to surrender. So after 3 days, the missions are run, and the first bomb is dropped on Hiroshima, and like I said, 125,000 people died. Some people believe the Japanese didn't think that we had a second one. I'm really leery about trying to estimate what other people believe. Sometimes it's hard enough for me to know what I believe, and I'm sitting in the same room with myself. But 3 days later, we dropped the second bomb. And after the second bomb is dropped, the Japanese emperor will surrender. Now, couple things. People talk about the why was it wrong to drop the bomb. One of the first arguments is that they dropped the bomb and it killed over 100,000 people. Well, that is true. However, during the war in Europe, we would firebomb certain cities where well more than 100,000 people would die in the firebombing. For example, the firebombing of the city of Dresden. It took days. It took days to do that. And I guess the one main point about the distinction between the firebombing of Dresden and the bombing of Hiroshima is Hiroshima has one bomb dropped on it. And when the one bomb is dropped and it floats down the parachute around 19,000 feet above the surface of the land, it explodes. It kills 100,000 people instantly. Now, we don't know, but probably within the next year, another 100,000 people are going to die from radiation sickness, and untold more will die over the next 10 years. Now, so what was the justification? Well, Truman had to weigh, on the one hand, potentially killing millions of Japanese people, as well as how many Americans were going to die in the battle at the same time, as opposed to dropping these two bombs and only killing 200,000 people in the initial blast. I just hope that I never have to be confronted with choices like that, with making decisions that are going to. It reminds me of Winston Churchill when the Turing had broken the Enigma code, and the British government had access to the German secret code that the Germans thought was unbreakable. According to most historians, there's still some debate about all this at this point, but when the city of Covington was going to be bombed, the Germans had sent a message to talk about this mission to bomb it, and the information was brought, because we now had the code. The information was brought to Churchill, and Churchill had to decide what to do. They had time to evacuate the city of Covington. They could evacuate. But if they would have evacuated the city prior to the bombing, the Germans would have been able to determine that we had broken their code. The idea of us being able to read the Germans' messages was important for us, especially as we're developing this D-Day plan to invade Europe. At this point, we knew what the Germans were doing. We knew what they were planning and what they were thinking. If we would have allowed them, they would have found some other plan, and since D-Day was going to be early the next year, we wouldn't have had time to be able to break a new code in time for the invasion. And so Churchill had to decide what to do. And so what he did was they kept the secret. They kept the secret. They decided that this invasion on D-Day was going to be more important for it to be successful than for them to evacuate all those people and run the risk of not being successful during D-Day. Now, while I was teaching at Lee's McRae, I had a student who came to me, and he told me, he said, "That's Covington, that's where my grandmother lives." And I asked him, I said, "Well, how long she lived there?" He says, "She'd lived there all her life. When she was a little girl, she grew up there." And I'm like, "Oh." And so what did she think of Churchill? And he told me that she still had a picture of Winston Churchill hanging up in her house. That she said that the people in Covington, once they found out what was going on, because they were already used to going into their bomb shelters, and whenever the air raid sirens come, they had already been prepared for that. And so she said that the German people respected the decision, or the British people respected this decision to do this. I don't know myself. Like I said, Churchill believed in his own journals, he said it was a decision that always haunted him, to make those kinds of decisions and to do that kind of thing. It was a decision that always haunted him. And so he was, it always bothered him, even though most of the British people understood what was going on. When Truman had to make this decision about dropping the atomic bomb, I can't imagine it was been something easy. But based on the information, I guess it's hard to look at somebody and judge their decisions when we don't have all the information that they have. So what we're going to do is, again, like I said, I just wanted to answer this question. The reason Truman dropped the bomb was he believed he was actually going to be saving lives, probably on the scale of hundreds of thousands of lives at this point. So historically, this is the reason that the atomic bomb was dropped the first two times. And it does, in fact, bring an end to the war in Japan. So keep taking your quizzes, and I'll hurry and get all the rest of the quizzes opened up so you guys can get started on them.